Peculiarity of Poverty
Defining Poverty and a Means of Measurement
by Jack Hardage
and Wyatt Hamilton.
Now the question is, Wyatt, how should we, as a people, define and measure poverty?
Please tell me.
Well, poverty should be defined as the deprivation of capabilities integral to living an adequate life, relative to the rest of society.
As well, poverty should be measured using a combination of parameters from the HDI and SPM.
Capability. Well, we've defined a capability as one's freedom and ability to perform a certain action or be in a certain state of being. For example, LeBron James has the ability to dunk a basketball, but Kevin Hart does not. And furthermore, Martha Nussbaum developed a list of 10 central capabilities that must be met in order to have a dignified life. She does admit, however, that these capabilities only meet the bare minimum for living a dignified life.
These central capabilities include life, bodily health, bodily integrity, senses, imagination, and thought, emotions, practical reason, affiliation, other species, play, and control over one's environment.
The deprivation of these capabilities can result from a whole host of reasons that are often interlinked. Going down the list, a lack of income, which includes not making enough money to sustain oneself or their family, a lack of ability to convert income into resources, and this may be from either a mental or physical impediment, a lack of resources, high expenses, which means costs cancel out or outweigh income. And finally, a lack of opportunity. And this could result from either government oppression, discrimination, or a lack of education, which we'll delve into a little bit later. We've defined an adequate life as one that does not only meet the 10 central capabilities we discussed earlier, but also must have sufficient opportunity for self-improvement, generational mobility, and the capability to be a functioning member of society. So, a functioning member of society is someone with a basic knowledge of math, social studies, science, arts, humanities, the government, and the rules of law. And we decided this because without this knowledge, one's capabilities to participate and benefit from society is seriously hindered. Especially in the 21st century, a high school education or equivalent is required in order to participate to the full extent of one's society. And without the opportunity and incentive to improve one's circumstances, their life would lack purpose. This can be seen in socialism when you take away one's incentive to do better in their work life, and their productivity levels drop dramatically. So an adequate life means that people need a greater incentive than just meeting their basic needs. And this goes along with generational mobility, which is defined as one's ability to do better than their parents.
As well, they can also do worse than their parents. Next, let's talk about the relative aspects of poverty. The context of the entire society must be included when analyzing poverty, because the definition of poverty changes by geographic location and time. The definition of poverty is greatly affected by the cost of living and the quality of life. For instance, poverty in the United States, according to Peter Singer, 97% of those classified by the U.S. Census Bureau as poor own a colored TV, whereas in Africa, those who are classified as impoverished are fighting for food on a daily basis. Also, looking at the aspect of time, poverty in the 21st century is a lot different than poverty in the 18th century, whereas poverty in the 21st century, people have a lot more amenities than those in the 18th century. In the United States, poverty is measured through two different means: the official poverty measure, otherwise known as the OPM, and the supplemental poverty measure, the SPM. On a global scale, poverty is measured through the Human Development Index, otherwise known as the HDI. Each of these measures has their strengths and drawbacks, but a combination of both the SPM and the HDI offers the most accurate means of distinguishing poverty. The official poverty measure was established in 1963 by the U.S. Census Bureau. It is calculated using the pre-tax income minus 3 times the cost of the minimum food diet in 1963. It is also adjusted for family size. In terms of the OPM, its strengths include over 50 years worth of historical data that we can compare to data from today to determine how poverty has changed over the last half century. As well, conceptually it is very easy to understand because it is an absolute measure, which means there's a distinct line to determine whether somebody is in poverty or not. The OPM has some very distinct weaknesses. First, the poverty threshold is outdated. It measures poverty by taking 3 times the cost of the Economy Food Plan, which is a government-created food plan describing what a human must ingest for adequate nutrition. The problem arises in that today, the distribution of the average person's income is not well reflected by the OPM's threshold. Also, it neglects to account for government benefits, which leads to a skewed representation of the poverty line.
The Supplemental Poverty Measure was established in 2010 to address some of the limitations of the official poverty measure. This poverty measure is calculated based on the consumer expenditure for families of 2. The SPM is an improvement upon the OPM because it adjusts for housing costs by geographical location, family size, and composition. Furthermore, the SPM also accounts for in-kind benefits, and this includes any type of government subsidies like food stamps, for instance. And finally, the SPM focuses on FCSU needs. Now, FCSU stands for Food, Clothing, Shelter, and Utilities. Finally, the SPM does have some drawbacks. For starters, data is relatively confusing to discern. What this means is because the SPM is calculating so many different variables, it's really hard to accurately, empirically get results. And furthermore, because the SPM is fairly new, there's a lack of historical data. Established in 1990, the Human Development Index is a statistical tool used to compare countries' social and economic status. It utilizes education, life expectancy, and gross national income per capita to calculate its thresholds. The HDI accounts for education, which we talked about as being an important parameter previously, life expectancy, and living standards, which is measured by gross national income per capita. However, the HDI does not account for regional disparities. It does not respond to short-term changes because it measures life expectancy, and higher national wealth does not necessarily indicate real welfare.
Taking into account the strengths and weaknesses of these 3 measures, we have developed a new and improved way to analyze poverty, the Adjusted Poverty Measure. The Adjusted Poverty Measure is our adaptation of particular aspects from both the SPM and the HDI, neglecting to use any portion of the OPM because it is too outdated in its means of measurement. The Adjusted Poverty Measure, otherwise known as the APM, pulls from the SPM first an adjustment for cost of living by region, in order to ensure that our measure accounts for the relativity of poverty previously mentioned. Secondly, it accounts for all in-kind benefits in the measure, in order to combat the previously mentioned issues of the OPM. Thirdly, the APM uses the SPM's FCSU needs as a key determinant factor. The APM only pulls one aspect from the HDI, accounting for education, life expectancy, living standards, because these are all philosophical determinants that can be measured empirically. Thus, this poverty measure exploits only the strengths of the SPM and HDI and avoids the drawbacks of all 3 methods of measuring poverty that were previously mentioned.
In conclusion, this is why poverty should be defined as the deprivation of capabilities integral to living an adequate life, relative to the rest of society.
As well, poverty should be measured using the APM, which is a combination of the HDI and SPM.